Hey everybody, this is Erik from Valve, and this is a talk called Testing Your Game on Steam. In this talk, we'll cover the features and tools that Steam offers to help you test your game, and we'll also talk about the stages of a game's development lifecycle and when it might be best to use each feature. We'll also cover internal testing of your game, external betas using Steam keys, using the Steam playtest feature, and even post-launch testing of your game. All right, let's jump right into it. Welcome to Testing Your Game on Steam. If you're watching this video, you're probably thinking about running a beta for your game on Steam. And if you're running a beta, you might be looking for feedback from players about gameplay, or bug reports to help you find and fix any issues in your game. Or you may also be looking to stress test your servers to make sure that you're delivering a smooth experience for players when you launch. This talk is going to cover all the tools and features you can use to run a beta on Steam. With so many features and options, where do you start? Start with thinking about your needs for your game. And there are some helpful questions that you can ask yourself to help you think about your needs. The first one might be, how many players do I want in this beta that I'm running? Am I thinking about running a relatively small beta, or am I at a stage of development in the game where I want to have lots of players playing my game? Another question you might ask is, do I want my beta to be open or closed? What phase of development are you in right now? Do I want my beta to be scalable in size? Let's say that your beta right now has 500 players, but you eventually need 50,000 players to properly test your game. It's good to identify ahead of time if it's important for you to be able to grow your beta's size over time. And finally, is my beta for the public or just friends and family? And these questions are closely linked to thinking about your goals. And there's some suggestions that we have when you think about planning your goals for a beta. The first one is, have a plan going into your beta for gathering feedback. Of course, it doesn't really make sense to run a beta and to get a bunch of feedback if you don't have a good way to gather that feedback and think about that feedback. We also suggest being serious about implementing the feedback that you're getting from players, because players are giving you good information about your game, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense to gather all that feedback if you weren't in a position to be able to implement that. And related to that, give yourself time to implement the feedback that you're getting. If you run your beta too close to the launch of your game, then you're not able to really give yourself the time that you need to incorporate the feedback that you're getting. Okay, you've thought about your needs and your goals. Now let's plan your approach, starting with talking about the phases of a game's development lifecycle. And here's an example game development lifecycle, and when Steam's beta testing features may be most helpful during each phase of a game's development. Your game's lifecycle might look a little different. And as a developer, you can pick and choose which features and tools make sense for your game. You don't need to use all of these features, just the ones that will help you achieve your goals. We'll go through each one of these phases, but it all starts with uploading your first build. In phase 1, only the developers have access to the build, and they're doing internal testing. In phase 2, we take the testing external and start running a closed beta with Steam keys. In phase 3, the testing goes more broad with the Steam playtest feature, and that brings us to a release. But then we'll look at post-launch testing with phase 4. Okay, let's take a closer look at each phase and how you can use Steam's tools and features. Phase 1. During this phase, only the developers have access to the build of the game, and you're only doing internal playtests. And you're accomplishing this by uploading your build into Steamworks. It's just that simple. Anyone with the correct permissions in your Steamworks partner group will have access to your build through auto-grants. It's going to happen automatically. You will likely be uploading many builds as development progresses. You may even want to automate the process of uploading builds. Our uploading to Steam documentation has plenty of pointers to help you streamline this phase of development. Your project may be in phase 1 for a long time, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it because it's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to move on to phase 2. In this stage of a game's development, you've been working on the game for a while and have done some internal testing, and now you're ready to get some feedback from actual players. In this phase, you may want to run a closed beta with a set of hand-picked players. We'll call this focused external testing. Steam keys are a useful tool for this type of beta. Steam keys offer you a way to grant specific user access to your development build of your game, meaning that you get to select which players get access and which players get to be testers, which makes it great for friends and family betas or other small closed betas. The type of Steam key that we'd recommend using for this type of beta during this phase of development is a release state override Steam key. But what is a release state override Steam key? It's a type of Steam key that overrides the release state of your game. It grants immediate access to the default branch of your game, even if your game isn't released yet. Hence the name release state override, because it overrides the release state of your game. Release date override Steam keys are a feature that Steam offers to help you test your game before launch, and they're requested for your main app ID. They're really suitable for smaller scale closed betas, and they are not revoked at launch, which means that when you hand out these keys to potential testers, they will retain ownership of your game unless you revoke these keys. So keep that in mind. Release date override Steam keys are generally limited to 2,500 keys total. That 2,500 includes keys you may need for testing, for running betas, for publishers, or sending out to the media or influencers, and also for crowdfunding purposes. So keep that in mind. You can't toggle access on or off for users who have a release date override Steam key like you can with Steam playtests, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Users with release date override Steam keys can play your default branch build anytime and immediately, meaning that it's always on. And whenever you update your default branch, they will get those updates. Another thing to keep in mind is that any kind of Steam key, including release date override Steam keys, have value and are easily transferable before they are redeemed. We recommend doing your best to track these keys and who should have access to the build. Speaking of access and security, do you need your beta to be secret during this phase of testing? If so, release date override Steam keys for your main app ID could be an answer for you. And that's because before release, store presence and app configuration aren't detectable. And in this case, when you're using a release date override Steam key, you have not released your game. So these things aren't detectable. And also, friends aren't able to see players launching, playing, or even owning the game when it is in an unreleased state. However, it's important to keep in mind that your playtest is only as secret as your least trustworthy playtester. And we highly recommend announcing your game before running any non-internal playtests. Let's move to phase 3, and this is the phase of development when you're ready for wider scale testing, and you're going to do that using the Steam Playtest feature. Steam Playtest is designed to help you run a successful beta on Steam, big or small, open or closed. And what's great is that you can make one with a single click. Steam Playtest is low risk. You use a separate app ID from your main app ID, and you have a separate build and build review. Playtime on your Steam Playtest app ID does not count towards the actual game, and there are no user reviews for playtest apps. It's easy to manage and gate access to Steam Playtest. You can have a store page sign up to have an open call to players, or you can use Steam key access to get players into your beta, or you can use both. You can add players who have requested access with one single click, and you can enable or end access to your playtest with a single click. It's super easy to manage your Steam playtest in Steamworks, and you're going to do that from the Steam Playtest dashboard. This is a central control center that you can use to configure your Steam Playtest and to control it with just a few clicks. And it gives you so much flexibility and so many options that are not available when you're trying to run a beta with your main app ID. From the dashboard, it's really easy to see how many participants have access to your beta, whether they're getting access via store page signup or Steam key, and how many players are waiting for access, waiting to get into your beta. There's also some information on friend invites that have been sent, and we'll talk about that in a few more minutes. I'll take a moment to talk about all of the ways that you can configure your playtest for your needs, starting with store visibility. When you click on Store Visibility, you can configure and add a Request Access button for your playtest on your store page. That allows players to go and request access to your beta. And when they do that, they're going to show up on your dashboard as a player waiting to get in. The next option you have is Sign Up Type. Now, by default, playtests are set to limited. So if you have a Request Access button on your store page, when a player clicks that button, they will get added to a pool of players waiting to get in. And as a developer, it's easy for you to manage player access to your playtest on the Steam Playtest dashboard. And here we're looking at the dashboard and your ability to add additional players. So you can see in this example that we have 8,411 players waiting for access, and there is no one currently in our playtest. To grant access to players, you would just go to the field there and enter the number of players that you want to add, and players will be randomly selected from the pool of waiting players, and they will be added to the playtest. So it's really a pool of players and not so much a queue of players waiting to get into your beta. If you're playtesting with a multiplayer game and you have server limitations, for example, let's say that you only have servers spun up currently in the United States, you can choose to add users from specific countries. So in this particular case, if you only had servers that could service players in the US, you could click on the US and you can see there are 437 players waiting, and you would enter a number to grant access to, and it would select a random assortment of players from that pool of players that are waiting and give them access to the playtest. And when a player does get access to a playtest, they will receive an email from Steam letting them know the good news that they're now in the playtest, and the playtest is also added to the user's library. So going back to configuring your playtest, in the sign-up type configuration, you have two choices. You can choose limited, which is that anyone can click the request access and get added to a pool of players waiting to get in. As a reminder, this is the default selection. Or you can select open sign-up. And if you select open sign-up, players who click request access are immediately let into the playtest. Next, we'll talk about playtest status. And here you can toggle your playtest between playable and not playable. When you set it to playable, players with access to your playtest can launch this playtest from their library. And when you set not playable, players can't launch the playtest. And it's important to remember that this is not possible with your main app ID. This is something that is unique to Steam Playtest as a feature, and something that is very useful if you want to gather feedback for a period of time and then maybe stop at a certain point and you want to take that feedback back, work on the game for a bit, and then reintroduce it to players and get an additional round of feedback. So you can turn on or off your playtest at any time with a simple click of a button. One thing I want to point out is that when you set your playtest to not playable, it doesn't remove the files from the player's PC. It only prevents them from launching the game from the Steam client. Finally, we'll talk about friend invites. Friend invites is another way for you to add players to your Steam playtest. When you enable friend invites, users with access to your playtest can invite friends, and those friends can go on to invite their friends. And this is a feature that is really designed for games that benefit from playing with friends. With friend invites, you can specify the number of invites each player gets, 1, 2, or 3. And you can enable or pause any time with a few clicks from the playtest dashboard. With friend invites, growth can compound really quickly. So it's really best for games with robust server capacity. If you're interested in learning more, check out our Steamworks documentation. So far, we've talked about two different ways that you can add players to your Steam playtest. The first is by adding a request access button to your store page, and the next is using friend invites. But there's another way that you can add players to your Steam playtest. You can also request Steam keys for your Steam Playtest app ID. This can be in addition to or instead of store page signups. You can request Steam keys for your Steam Playtest app ID even if your signup isn't live on your store page. Steam keys for your Steam Playtest app ID have some advantages. You have some flexibility with how you distribute those keys, and Steam keys are useful for adding specific users to your beta. We covered that a little bit earlier when we talked about release date override Steam keys. Now, when you're managing access to your Steam Playtest, remember that Steam Playtest keys can be revoked to remove access, but be thoughtful and communicate with players if you're planning to do that. It's not fun to be surprised when your access to a playtest is revoked. One question you may have is, how many Steam keys can I get for my Steam Playtest app ID? Generally, you can get up to 50,000 Steam keys for your Steam Playtest app ID and potentially more. Talk to us for more information. Here are some other important things to keep in mind about the Steam Playtest feature. First, Steam Playtests aren't featured on the Steam Store in any way. They can appear on your game's store page if you have it configured that way, and if they become really popular, they can also appear on Steam Chart's Most Played. Playtests will also appear on a player's friends list when they're playing it, so that's another way for players to discover playtests that their friends are playing. Betas using Steam Playtest are designed to grow in size over time and not shrink. You can't remove players who have signed up via store page. It is possible to revoke Steam keys for playtests, but again, that isn't a great user experience unless you've done a good job communicating that to players. Steam playtests are always free for players and can't be monetized. It's not okay to directly sell access to your playtest, and you also can't do any kind of in-game purchases for a Steam playtest. In fact, they just won't even work. It is okay to include Steam Playtest access with a pre-purchase if you are doing one for your game, but I added an asterisk here because we don't offer pre-purchases for every game, and if you have questions about pre-purchases on Steam and how they work, I recommend reading through the Steamworks documentation page on pre-purchases to learn more. It's also okay to offer Steam Playtest access as a reward for your time-limited crowdfunding campaign, but again, I'd recommend reading through our Steamworks documentation page on Steam keys. Okay, that covers just about everything that you need to know about Steam Playtest. And we're going to move on to phase 4 now, where we're going to continue to use the Steam Playtest feature, but we're going to be using it for post-launch testing. So some developers may not realize that Steam Playtest isn't just for unreleased games. You can use Steam Playtest as a public test realm for features or updates that you're working on for your game. It's really helpful for testing new content for your game, and it has the same useful feature of being able to turn it on or off at any time. And of course, playtests are free, so if your game is paid, be really thoughtful about how you offer player access, because otherwise, if you're offering the full build for your game in a Steam playtest, then players may be getting your full game for free. So just be thinking about what slice of the game that you want to offer in your Steam playtest. Let's look at an example of using Steam Playtest for post-launch testing using a case study. The Riftbreaker is a popular game on Steam that is using Steam Playtest to run a beta for a multiplayer feature they plan to add to the game. They've conducted signups using Discord, and access is controlled using Steam keys. They're planning to run an open beta with store page signup sometime in the future. Pavel Lecky from Exor Studios, the developer of the Riftbreaker, says, "We moved our closed multiplayer beta for the Riftbreaker entirely to Steam Playtest. I think it's a great tool both pre and post-release." He goes on to say, "The Playtest app is well integrated within the Steam ecosystem. Other players can see that their friends are playing it, which gives us additional visibility and exposure. Thanks to the fact that the build, upload, and management process is separated from the main application, we can set up additional experimental and development branches within the playtest itself." Finally, he says, "It's a great tool for maintaining a closed beta with fine-grained controls." Okay, I think that pretty much covers what you need to know about testing your game on Steam. I mentioned a few times during the talk that you're welcome to reach out to us anytime if you have questions. So I'll leave a link in the video description where you can do that, and also a link to our Steamworks documentation where there's lots of helpful information about each one of these features and tools. Thanks so much for watching.